The science is quite clear on this over the last really 50 years or so, to where we know that these carbon emissions, these greenhouse gases, are polluting our climate and causing harms that we're seeing in the Midwest, around this country, and around the world.
Earlier this year, the UN's latest climate report confirmed yet again the seriousness of the climate crisis. The report warned of more extreme heat, wildfires, and floods over the next few decades. Now, while some of our changes to our climate may be irreversible, experts say immediate action is needed now to mitigate the worst of the effects. One key measure: reducing carbon emissions that fuel human-caused warming of our world. Let's take a moment to explain how greenhouse gases work and why those high levels are causing a rapid warming of our planet. Gabe?
Yeah, and I mean, we have greenhouse gases in the atmosphere normally. We actually need them.
It's natural.
Yeah, it's natural.
Yeah.
So let's take a moment to kind of talk about, again, what greenhouse gases do before we kind of explain the problem here. So greenhouse gases actually are needed to keep the heat in around us. Without them, all of this heat that hits the Earth from the sun would bounce right back into space, or a good portion of it. The atmosphere actually keeps us warm. It makes Earth livable. That's what these greenhouse gases do over here. Again, they're a layer of gases around the Earth that take that heat and only allow some of it to bounce back into space. They actually return some of that radiation back to the ground. So without greenhouse gases, our planet would not be livable. The issue right now, we're adding greenhouse gases to what naturally occur, and that's causing, again, more heat to keep bouncing back down to the surface of the Earth. Not enough of it is escaping, and we're seeing temperatures around the world, again, warm to alarming levels. Now, again, one of the ways we can start to stop that problem is by lowering the amount of gases, greenhouse gases, that we're putting into the atmosphere. Carbon is one form of greenhouse gas. You may think of carbon dioxide. That's one of those greenhouse gases. Again, let's kind of break down and talk about what those biggest emitters in Allen County are doing and what experts say can help us to really take back and rewind the clock that is ticking as the climate changes. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's latest report warns of big impacts to the way we live our lives due to climate change, even if warming is limited to just 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Greenhouse gases trap heat in the atmosphere. Some greenhouse gases are needed. Too many of them, which is the problem right now, cause the Earth to warm too much.
The science is quite clear on this over the last really 50 years or so, to where we know that these carbon emissions, these greenhouse gases, are polluting our climate and causing harms that we're seeing in the Midwest, around this country, and around the world.
Greenhouse gas emissions, also known as carbon emissions, skyrocketed during the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s. Even today, factories produce carbon that contributes to our warming planet. The Environmental Protection Agency lists 6 major carbon emitters in Allen County, most of which are factories. The top 3 emitters, Superior Aluminum Alloys, Fort Wayne's GM Assembly Plant, and the Serval Landfill, each produce less than 100,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide every year. But there are much bigger emitters just outside the county. Steel Dynamics plant in Columbia City emits roughly 3 times what the Serval Landfill does, and their Butler plant emits nearly 10 times Allen County's biggest emitter. I talked to 2 of the biggest emitters in the area, General Motors and Steel Dynamics. Both companies lay out environmental goals they hope to meet over the next several decades, and they insist they're doing all they can.
You know, one thing is we're trying to improve energy performance, which cuts emissions. We have a cogen that we're trying to pull the heat off. That helps with the heating situation. Just anything we can do to reduce our need for energy is a big part of it. That's a big part of cutting down on the emissions, is reducing that energy need.
So we've had engineering firms come in and also look at potential investments we can make in our facilities, such as our Columbia City facility and our Butler facility.
Both Benzing and Wagler also say supporting renewable energy projects will help them reduce their emissions.
We're also looking at supporting our local utilities with renewable energy, so wind and solar. We need reliable energy, we use a lot, but we can support projects on the renewable side.
But a lot of it's going to be using wind power from the wind farms east of Fort Wayne, to using methane gas from the landfill, and that we're going to slowly get away from as well.
General Motors in particular has an aggressive timeline for powering their plants with renewable energy.
About 100% renewable energy coming into Fort Wayne, into this facility, which is another goal for GM. And by 2025, all of our plants are going to be renewable energy, 100%.
Steel Dynamics also has a timeline for becoming carbon neutral.
So by 2025, we've committed to reduce the scope 1 and 2 emissions by 20%, greenhouse gas. By 2030, we're going to reduce them by 50%. Finally, by 2050, we'll be carbon neutral in our steel making operations.
While the United Nations has set the goal of a carbon neutral world by 2050, given the amount of emissions produced at Steel Dynamics plants, I asked CFO Teresa Wagler, is 2050 soon enough?
I believe that it is. So again, we are taking a very proactive approach. We have milestones for 2025 and 2030 so that we can have transparency.
Granted, steel production is an energy-intensive process, which IU Environmental Resilience Institute's Matt Flaherty acknowledges.
I think it's important to acknowledge that this is an industry that produces a lot of emissions, and that we need to find a pathway away from that. We should be looking at how to evolve those manufacturing processes and improve them to be low carbon for the future.
Wagler insists they're doing all they can.
Can't tell you what those are today. I can tell you things will pivot. We'll pivot from one thing to the next. But I'm a believer in technology, and I'm a believer in smart people, being able to accomplish those things.
Experts stress investing in those changes will be for the best in the long run.
If you are at the forefront of innovation in your industry, you're going to be at a competitive advantage and more resilient to those changes, to that regulation around climate in the future.
And Flaherty notes that making changes to the way we make both steel and cars are a big undertaking.
These transitions take time. They're going to take decades, and that will be happening in conjunction with a cleaner and cleaner electric grid. So it highlights the need for us to be honest and looking straight ahead at the challenge of addressing emissions, carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions across all these different sectors, understanding the transitions that need to take place, and then advocating for them.
So scientists have been warning us about this and warning industry about this for decades. Yeah. So some of the scientists we talk to will say, well, industry should have begun changing a long time ago. Yeah. But technology has caught up now, and I think it sounds like there is a will now to at least institute some changes here. Is that what you're hearing?
There's a will and definitely an emphasis too in don't give up, right? Because we have some people saying it's too late.
It's not though.
It's not too late. We still have plenty of time to take care of a lot of these things. And one thing that Matt Flaherty had talked about when I spoke with him was framing things again in an economically beneficial way. Can we cut costs? Can we do things like that that benefit things economically? And I know GM, comes to mind as a big employer around here. So I asked Jeff Benzing when I was there, what about the transition to electric cars? They're not making them in Fort Wayne now. Is that possible in the future? And he had mentioned, yes, several GM plants made that transition to all electric cars because that's a goal of GM. They want to switch to all electric.
Right.
He said the Fort Wayne plant, absolutely. Eventually in the future at some point can switch to making all electric cars. So job losses aren't a big concern for them, they say.
Okay, that's what they're saying. That's good. That is good. So the important thing here is that we know why global warming is happening, why climate change is happening, the human-caused components, and that we can change things to mitigate the worst effects years down the road if we do it now.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely, yeah. And these goals, 2050 is kind of the goal, but the sooner the better, right?
Okay.
And we're really, being urged, the more quickly we can make these changes, the less bad the outcome can be.
And the science is widely available. We will make it available to you, easy to find on our website. We understand there's some skepticism here, and skepticism is good, but the science is very clear, agreed to around the world, and we'll put that on our website for you. So how do you feel about this story? What do you think? Let us know. Use the hashtag Tell21. Hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. If you have a story idea you think we should look into, call the Digging Deeper tip line, 260-376-0281.